In the glittering, cutthroat world of the 19th century English aristocracy, a title is a weapon, and marriage is a business transaction. For Lord Alistair Beaumont, the formidable Duke of Blackwood, ruin was a secret he guarded more closely than his fortune. He needed a bride, but not for love or companionship. He needed a signature on a contract for 30 days. He chose Miss Genevieve Langley, a painter's daughter with quiet dignity and crushing debts, believing her to be a pawn in his desperate game. But he never accounted for her spirit, her hidden fire, or the unforeseen clause in their arrangement, written not on paper, but on the heart. This is the story of how a temporary bargain became a battle for a lifetime of love. The scent of old leather and financial ruin clung to the air in the private study of Lord Alistair Beaumont, the 9th Duke of Blackwood. From the outside, Blackwood Manor was the pinnacle of ancestral power, its stone facade a testament to centuries of Beaumont dominance. But inside these walls, Alistair was suffocating under the weight of a legacy his late father had squandered. The ledgers on his mahogany desk, filled with the neat, unforgiving script of his solicitor, told a story of reckless wagers, failed investments, and debts that crawled like ivy up the very foundations of his estate. He was land-rich and cash-poor, a gilded cage on the verge of collapsing. The final blow had come in the form of a letter from his great-aunt Elspeth's estate, a colossal trust fund large enough to solve all his problems and secure the Blackwood name for a generation, was his for the taking. But there was a condition, a cruel and traditionalist stipulation penned by a woman who believed a man's worth was measured by his wife. The funds would only be released upon his marriage. To complicate matters further, his last hope for a commercial lifeline, a shipping partnership with the immensely wealthy and staunchly conservative Lord Harrington, also hinged on an image of stability. Harrington had made it clear he did business with family men, not rakish bachelors. Alistair had 1 month. 1 month to find a wife, secure the deal, and access the trust. Love was a luxury he could not afford. What he needed was a compliant, temporary duchess. His solicitor, a pragmatic man named Elias Davies, had been discreetly searching. The candidate must be of good standing, Duke, Davies had advised, but in circumstances dire enough to accept an unconventional arrangement. Someone without powerful connections, who might object or cause a scandal when the union is dissolved. And so they found her. Miss Genevieve Langley. Miles away, in a modest but clean townhouse in Bath, Genevieve Langley washed the turpentine from her slender fingers, the smell of oil paints her only comfort. She was an artist of remarkable talent, but in a world where female painters were a novelty at best and a scandal at worst, her passion was a secret. She sold her breathtaking landscapes and poignant portraits through a male intermediary, using the pseudonym Gilles Lanson, to pay for her mother's medicine and keep the bailiffs from her father's door. Her father, a gentleman with a scholar's mind and a gambler's weakness, had followed in the footsteps of Alistair's own sire. The debts were piling up, and the weight of his shame was a constant, silent presence in their small home. That evening, she crept down the stairs and heard her father's choked sobs as he spoke to her mother. "We are ruined, my dear, utterly ruined. The last of the properties must be sold." Genevieve's heart seized. She was the one holding them together with the secret sales of her art. But it wasn't enough. The well was running dry. She felt a familiar, cold dread wash over her. It was the same dread she felt 2 days later, when a pristine black carriage, bearing a ducal crest, stopped before their humble home. Alistair Beaumont did not waste time with pleasantries. He sat in their worn drawing-room, his tall frame and severe, handsome face a stark contrast to the threadbare furniture. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black coat, his presence sucking the very air from the room. He addressed her father, but his cool, analytical grey eyes were fixed on Genevieve. "Mr. Langley," he began, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "I am aware of your financial difficulties. I am here to offer a solution, a permanent one." He laid out the proposition with the cold precision of a surgeon. He required a wife for a period of 1 month. She would assume the title of Duchess of Blackwood. She would be required to attend several social engagements and present a convincing portrait of a devoted wife. In return, upon their quiet annulment after 30 days, he would settle every last one of the Langley family's debts. Furthermore, he would provide Miss Langley with an annuity so generous it would guarantee her and her family a life of comfort and security forever. Genevieve's father paled, speechless. It was an insulting, outrageous proposal, but it was also a lifeline. Genevieve looked at the Duke, a man who spoke of marriage as if it were the purchase of livestock. She saw no warmth in his eyes, only grim determination. He was a man cornered just as she was. She thought of her mother's frail health, her father's despair, the secret canvases hidden in her room that were not enough to save them. Her artistic dreams felt like a childish fantasy in the face of such brutal reality. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but steady. "I have conditions." Alistair raised a single, surprised eyebrow. "Indeed?" "The arrangement will be detailed in a legal contract written by your solicitor," she said, her gaze unwavering. "It will stipulate separate living quarters. Public affection will be for appearances only, and no party shall make any emotional claim upon the other. It is a business arrangement, Your Grace. Let us treat it as such." For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold calculation crossed Alistair's face. It was a sliver of respect. "Very well, Miss Langley," he said, rising to his feet. "It seems we have a deal." The contract was as cold and precise as the Duke himself. Drafted by Mr. Davies, it outlined every detail of their temporary union. Clause 3A. The Duchess will reside at Blackwood Manor for the duration of the agreement. Clause 4B. The Duke and Duchess will maintain separate bedchambers and private living spaces. Clause 7C. Any public displays of affection shall be performed solely for the purpose of maintaining the charade and will cease in private. It was a 30-day performance, and Genevieve was the lead actress in a play she had never wished to join. The wedding was a whisper. It took place in a small, ancient stone chapel on the farthest edge of the Blackwood estate, a place forgotten by time. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. The only attendees were Genevieve's father, who looked ashen and defeated, and Mr. Davies, whose face was a mask of professional neutrality. Genevieve wore a simple cream travelling dress, the finest thing she owned, yet it felt like sackcloth in the shadow of the ducal name she was about to assume. Alistair stood beside her at the altar, a towering figure in dark grey, his jaw set. When he spoke his vows, his voice was clear and steady, but his words felt hollow, echoing in the empty nave. When the vicar prompted him to place the ring on her finger, his touch was brief and impersonal, the heavy gold band feeling like a manacle on her skin. She was no longer Miss Langley. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, a title she had rented for a month. Her life changed the moment she stepped out of the chapel. The carriage that took them to the main house was no longer a visitor's transport. It was hers. As they pulled up the long, sweeping drive to Blackwood Manor, Genevieve felt a fresh wave of intimidation. The house was not a home. It was a fortress of stone and history, its many windows like eyes watching her, judging her. The staff was assembled in the grand entrance hall, a stoic line of maids, footmen, and butlers led by the formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. Her face was a road map of disapproving lines, her gaze sweeping over Genevieve's simple attire with barely concealed disdain. "Your staff, Your Grace," Alistair said, his tone clipped. He had not spoken a word to her since the ceremony. He introduced her with stark formality. "This is the Duchess. You will afford her every courtesy." The message was clear. She was a part of the house now, another fixture to be managed. Her new chambers were opulent beyond anything she could have imagined. A vast four-poster bed draped in dark blue velvet dominated the room, and a fire crackled in a marble fireplace large enough to stand in. The furniture was exquisitely carved, the carpets priceless. A lady's maid, a young, nervous girl named Rose, was assigned to her. But the luxury felt suffocating. It was a beautiful, gilded cage. The adjoining door to the Duke's chambers was, as per their contract, firmly locked. The days that followed were a study in loneliness. Alistair was a ghost. He was either locked away in his study, dealing with the estate's precarious finances, or out riding across his lands, a solitary figure against the horizon. They ate their meals in a cavernous dining hall, seated at opposite ends of a table so long they might as well have been in different rooms. The silence was broken only by the clinking of silverware and the quiet footsteps of the servants. He was honoring their agreement to the letter. He made no demands of her, offered no conversation beyond what was necessary. "Good morning, Duchess." "Good evening, Duchess." She was a title, not a person. Genevieve explored the manor on her own. She walked through endless portrait galleries, the painted eyes of Beaumont ancestors following her every move. They were dukes and duchesses, soldiers and scholars, their expressions stern and proud. She felt like an imposter, a temporary placeholder in a lineage of steel. One afternoon, she found herself in the West Wing, a part of the house that felt different, less formal, with more light. At the end of a long corridor, she found a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she gasped. The room was a vast art studio, flooded with light from a massive arched window. Canvases, some stretched and blank, others covered in forgotten sketches, were stacked against the walls. Easels stood like sentinels, and the air still held the faint, familiar scent of linseed oil and pigment. It felt like coming home. In one corner, covered by a dust sheet, was a half-finished painting. Pulling back the cloth, she saw a portrait of a woman with sad, intelligent eyes and a sensitive mouth. A woman who looked remarkably like Alistair. This must have been his mother's studio. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood, Genevieve felt a pang of something other than anxiety or resentment. It was a flicker of connection, a shared secret with the ghost of the woman who had lived here before. Unpacking the small hidden satchel she had brought with her, she took out a charcoal pencil and a sketchbook. In the quiet, forgotten studio of a long-dead duchess, Genevieve Langley began to feel a glimmer of herself again. Their first trial by fire was scheduled a week after the wedding, the annual Harrington Ball, the pinnacle of the London season, and, for Alistair, the most important performance of his life. It was here he had to present his new duchess to the man whose investment could save him. The failure of this night was not an option. Alistair had instructed the finest modiste in London to create a wardrobe for his bride. Gowns of silk, satin, and lace filled the armoires in Genevieve's room, each one a work of art, each one a costume for the role she was to play. For the Harrington Ball, she chose a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered like a night sky. It was cut elegantly, accentuating her grace without being ostentatious. Rose helped her dress, her nervous fingers fumbling with the tiny pearl buttons. When Genevieve descended the grand staircase, Alistair was waiting at the bottom. He was dressed in immaculate evening attire, and for a moment, as he looked up at her, his mask of ducal indifference slipped. His grey eyes widened almost imperceptibly, tracing the line of her dress, the simple but elegant way Rose had styled her auburn hair, the quiet confidence in her posture. He had procured a bride, but he had not expected her to be beautiful. The carriage ride to London was silent, the air thick with unspoken tension. As they neared Harrington House, Alistair finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "You will be scrutinized tonight. Lord Harrington is a shrewd man. You must be charming, attentive, and above all convincing. Can you do this?" "I am aware of my duties, Your Grace," she replied, her own voice cool. The contract was quite clear. The ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of light, music, and wealth. Hundreds of guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, their jewels glittering, their laughter echoing. The moment the Duke of Blackwood and his new, unknown Duchess were announced, a hush fell over the room. Every eye turned to them. Genevieve felt a surge of panic, but she pushed it down, lifting her chin slightly. She was an artist. She understood observation. Tonight, she was the one being observed. Alistair placed a hand on the small of her back, the first time he had touched her outside of the wedding ceremony. The gesture was possessive, proprietary, and entirely for show, but the warmth of his hand through the silk sent a jolt through her. He guided her through the sea of curious faces towards their host. Lord Harrington was a portly man with sharp, intelligent eyes. He greeted Alistair warmly before turning his full attention to Genevieve. "And this must be the woman who has finally captured the elusive Duke of Blackwood. An honour to meet you, Your Grace." "The honour is all mine, Lord Harrington," Genevieve said, offering a graceful curtsy. Her voice was calm, her smile genuine. She was playing her part. Throughout the evening, Alistair was a consummate actor. He stayed by her side, his hand resting possessively on her back or at her elbow. He smiled down at her, fetched her champagne, and whispered fabricated endearments into her ear that were just loud enough for those nearby to overhear. To the outside world, they were the image of newlywed bliss, but it was Genevieve who truly shone. Alistair had expected a quiet, mousy woman who would cling to his arm. Instead, he watched, stunned, as his temporary Duchess engaged Lord Harrington in a spirited discussion about Italian art. "The Titian in your gallery," she was saying, her eyes bright with passion. "The use of colour is masterful. Most collectors overlook his later works, but I find the raw emotion in them far more compelling than the precision of his youth." Harrington beamed, delighted. "My dear Duchess, you have a remarkable eye. Few people appreciate that piece." Alistair watched, forgotten for a moment. He had never heard her speak with such fervour. He saw not the impoverished woman he had hired, but a brilliant, captivating person who held the complete attention of the most important man in the room. Later, when they were dancing the requisite waltz, he held her a little more closely than necessary. "You seem to be enjoying yourself," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I am performing my role as instructed," she replied, not missing a step. "You are exceeding expectations," he admitted, a grudging respect in his tone. As he spun her around the dance floor, for one brief, dizzying moment, the line between the performance and reality blurred. The lights of the chandeliers swam around them, the music swelled, and he looked down into her intelligent, expressive eyes. In that moment, she wasn't the Duchess he had bought. She was Genevieve. And for the first time, Alistair Beaumont felt a stir of something dangerously close to admiration. The business transaction was becoming complicated. The success of the Harrington ball brought them a temporary reprieve. Lord Harrington was charmed, and the whispers in society were of the Duke's surprising and brilliant new wife, not of his financial woes. Back at Blackwood Manor, however, the chill between Alistair and Genevieve returned, the vast halls once again echoing with their shared silence. Yet something had shifted. The Duke's gaze would sometimes linger on her for a moment too long at the dinner table, a flicker of curiosity in his guarded eyes. Genevieve found her escape in the West Wing studio. It became her sanctuary, the one place in the enormous, oppressive house where she could breathe. Surrounded by the ghost of Alistair's mother, she felt a strange kinship. She began to paint, using the small set of watercolors she had brought from home. She painted the view from the window, the rolling hills of the Blackwood estate, the ancient oaks standing like sentinels. The act of creation was a quiet rebellion against the gilded cage she inhabited. One grey afternoon, lost in her work, she didn't hear the heavy footsteps approaching down the corridor. The door swung open with a creak, and Alistair stood there, his face a thunderous mask of fury. "What are you doing in here?" he bit out, his voice sharp as broken glass. Genevieve jumped to her feet, instinctively shielding her sketchbook. I found the room unlocked. I meant no disrespect." "This room is not for you," he snapped, striding into the studio. His eyes swept over the space, landing on the unfinished portrait of his mother that Genevieve had uncovered. His expression hardened into something akin to pain. "This was my mother's. It has been locked since her death. Get out." The raw command in his voice stung her, but it also ignited a spark of defiance. "Why?" she challenged, her own voice rising. "Because she was a duchess who dared to have a passion beyond producing an heir? Because she dared to be more than just a title?" The accusation hit its mark. Alistair flinched, as if she had struck him. "You know nothing of my mother. I know what it feels like to have a part of your soul that you are forced to hide," she retorted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I see her in this room, her talent, her spirit. Did you lock it away to protect her memory, or to bury a part of yourself that you are afraid of?" They stood facing each other, the air crackling with a tension that went far beyond their contract. For the first time, this wasn't about business. It was about something real, something painful. Alistair's anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a weary sadness. "My mother," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "loved this room up to more than any other part of this house. But she felt trapped by her duties. She believed her title and her art could not coexist. Being a duchess slowly suffocated her spirit. I watched it happen." He looked at Genevieve then, truly looked at her, and saw not an employee, but a woman with the same fire he had seen die out in his mother's eyes. "I did not want a reminder." Genevieve's anger softened into an unexpected wave of empathy. He wasn't just a cold, arrogant duke. He was a son who had watched his mother suffer, a man who had equated passion with pain and duty with survival. He had built his own cage, just as surely as she was living in one. "A passion doesn't have to be a weakness, Your Grace," she said softly. "Sometimes it is the only thing that gives us the strength to perform our duties." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. He was a man who prized control above all else. Yet this woman, this stranger he had hired, had effortlessly breached his defenses and seen the cracks in his armor. He should have been furious, but instead he felt a reluctant sense of understanding. He walked over to a large, dust-covered cabinet and unlocked it with a key from his pocket. Inside were pristine sets of oil paints, brushes of every size, and rolls of canvas. They were his mother's, untouched for years. "My mother would have wanted another artist to use them," he said, his back still to her. "The room is yours to use, on one condition." Genevieve held her breath. "What is it?" He turned to face her, his grey eyes unreadable. "Show me what you paint." It wasn't an order, but a request, a fragile bridge being built across the chasm of their arrangement. It was a truce, born from a shared, secret pain. Genevieve nodded, unable to speak. As Alistair left the studio, closing the door quietly behind him, she knew that the terms of their contract were becoming increasingly irrelevant. The fragile piece, forged in the art studio, was soon threatened by a venomous new presence at Blackwood. Lady Beatrice Crawford, the daughter of an earl and a woman Alistair had once courted out of dynastic convenience, had always considered herself the future Duchess of Blackwood. Alistair's sudden, shocking marriage to a virtual unknown had been a public humiliation, and she arrived for a planned weekend hunting party, with vengeance glittering in her cold blue eyes. Beatrice was everything Genevieve was not. She was flawlessly coiffed, dripping in jewels, and possessed a sharp, cruel wit that she wielded like a scalpel. From the moment she arrived, she made Genevieve her target. "Langley," Beatrice had mused aloud at the dinner table on the first night, her voice carrying across the room. "I can't say I'm familiar with the name. Are you from a provincial branch of the family?" The insult was veiled, but its meaning was clear. "You are a nobody." Genevieve, who had spent the past weeks poring over books on peerage in the Blackwood Library to prepare for this very kind of attack, met her gaze with a calm smile. "My family has long valued privacy over prominence, Lady Beatrice. We find it leaves more time for worthwhile pursuits." The subtle retort earned a flicker of amusement from some of the other guests, and a tightening of Beatrice's lips. Alistair, seated at the head of the table, watched the exchange with a hawk-like intensity, saying nothing. The next day, during the hunt, Beatrice escalated her attack. While the men were off with their rifles, the ladies gathered on the lawn for tea. Beatrice, circling Genevieve like a predator, began a line of questioning about her upbringing, her education, her passions. "So tell us, Duchess," she purred, "what does a woman of your modest background do to occupy her time? I imagine the running of an estate like this must be quite overwhelming." Before Genevieve could reply, Beatrice continued, "I, for one, spent my youth studying French, watercolor, and the management of a large household, all in preparation for my station in life." This time the barb hit home. Genevieve felt a flush of anger and shame. She was managing, but only just. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, still treated her with frosty condescension, no doubt sensing her inexperience. But then an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "My wife is an accomplished artist," Alistair said. He had returned from the hunt early and was standing just behind the group, his expression unreadable. "Her talent far surpasses the conventional parlour hobbies of most ladies of the peerage." He walked to Genevieve's side and placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was firm and unequivocal. "And as for her management of this estate, she has my complete confidence. Which is, I believe, all that is required." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Beatrice stared, her mouth slightly agape, utterly stunned. The Duke had not just defended his wife, he had praised her, publicly elevating her talents above those of her tormentor. He had drawn a line in the sand, and Beatrice was on the wrong side of it. Mortified and furious, she quickly made an excuse and retreated. Later that evening, Genevieve found Alistair in the library, staring into the fire. "Thank you," she said softly from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "She was insulting you, and by extension, she was insulting my judgment. I will not tolerate that in my own home." "It felt like more than that," Genevieve pressed, stepping into the room. "You didn't have to praise my painting." He finally turned, his grey eyes searching her face. "I told the truth. I saw the sketches you left in the studio. They are exceptional. The simple, honest praise from this man who so rarely offered any warmth felt more valuable than all the jewels Beatrice wore. He saw her, not just the Duchess, not just the woman from the contract, but the artist. "She will not let this go," Genevieve warned. "A woman like that, scorned. She will look for a weakness to exploit." "Then we shall give her none to find," Alistair replied, his voice a low vow. A subtle shift had occurred. It was no longer his battle or her performance. For the first time, it felt like they were on the same side. It was becoming us against them. The end of the month loomed, a stark deadline on a calendar that felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. The partnership with Lord Harrington was all but secured, pending the final signing of the papers. The trust fund was within reach. Alistair's plan was working perfectly. And yet, the thought of its success now filled him with a cold, hollow dread. The thought of Genevieve leaving Blackwood Manor was becoming unbearable. He had started making excuses to visit the art studio, standing by the door for long moments, watching her work. He would comment on the way she captured the light on the moors, or the defiant strength in the trunk of an old oak. They spoke of art, of history, of books. They spoke of everything except the contract that hung between them like a guillotine. One afternoon, Alistair asked her to accompany him on a ride to the far side of the estate, to a ruined abbey that was one of her favourite subjects to sketch. The day started fair, but the English weather was notoriously fickle. As they stood among the crumbling stone arches, the sky turned a bruised purple, and a sudden, violent storm rolled in off the moors. Rain began to fall in blinding sheets. "There's a gamekeeper's cottage just over this rise," Alistair shouted over the wind, grabbing her hand. "We can take shelter there." His grip was strong and sure, and Genevieve held on as he led her through the deluge. The cottage was small and rustic, long since abandoned, but its roof was mostly intact, and a dry hearth waited in the corner. Shivering, they stumbled inside, soaked to the bone. Alistair worked quickly, his ducal formality stripped away by the urgency of the moment. He found an old flint and steel, and, with surprising skill, managed to coax a small fire to life in the hearth. The tiny room was soon filled with a flickering, golden light. They were trapped, utterly alone, with the storm raging outside. The carefully constructed walls of their arrangement seemed to have been washed away with the rain. He was not the Duke, and she was not the Duchess. They were just Alistair and Genevieve. He gave her a rough wool blanket he had found in a chest. As she wrapped it around her shoulders, he looked at her, at the way the firelight danced in her damp hair and illuminated the soft curve of her cheek. "I am sorry," he said, his voice quiet and raw. "For all of it. The coldness of the bargain. Forcing you into this life." "You did what you had to do to save your home," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. "As did I." "It was meant to be a simple transaction," he continued, taking a step closer. "But it is no longer simple. Nothing about you is simple, Genevieve." He said her name, and the sound of it, spoken with such unguarded sincerity, made her heart ache. "Nor you, Alistair." He told her everything then, not just about the debts, but about the crushing weight of his father's failures, the fear of being the Duke who lost it all, the loneliness that had been his constant companion since his mother's death. She listened, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerable man beneath the ducal armor. In turn, she told him of her dreams, of studying in Italy, of having her work displayed in a gallery under her own name, not a pseudonym. She spoke of her fear that her talent would wither and die, buried under the duty to her family. He listened, and he saw the brilliant, passionate soul she had kept hidden from the world. The storm outside raged, but inside the tiny cottage, a different kind of storm was breaking. The space between them grew smaller, charged with unspoken feelings that had been simmering for weeks. "The month is almost over," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I know," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray, damp curl from her cheek. His touch was electric, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through her. His gaze dropped to her lips. All the rules, all the clauses of their contract, burned away in the heat of that single look. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, a collision of two lonely souls who had found an unexpected anchor in a stormy sea. It was a confession, a surrender, a promise of something far more real and dangerous than their simple contract had ever allowed. In the heart of the storm, they had finally found the truth. They returned to Blackwood Manor as the sun was setting, the storm having passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. But the clarity they'd found in the cottage was immediately clouded by the suffocating reality of the house. The kiss had changed everything. The contract was a lie, and the feelings that pulsed between them were a truth too powerful to ignore. They parted at the base of the grand staircase with a shared, lingering look, an unspoken promise to talk, to figure out what this new, fragile thing between them was. But they never got the chance. Waiting in Alistair's study, a triumphant smirk on her face, was Lady Beatrice Crawford. She had not been idle since her public humiliation. She had channeled her fury into a single-minded goal: to destroy the new Duchess and reclaim her position. She had sent agents to Bath to dig into the Langley family's affairs, and they had found exactly what she was looking for. One of Mr. Langley's desperate creditors, a man with loose lips and a thirst for coin, had been all too willing to talk about the strange, sudden settlement of his debts and the solicitor who had arranged it. From there, it was a short leap to uncovering the truth. On Alistair's desk, laid out like a death sentence, was a copy of the marriage contract. "An impressive document, Your Grace," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with mock admiration. "A bride for a month. How very practical. I wonder what your dear friend Lord Harrington would think of such a practical arrangement. He is such a romantic, isn't he? He believes so strongly in the sanctity of marriage." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. He was trapped. Beatrice held his entire future in her hands. The trust fund, the partnership, the Blackwood name, all of it could be turned to ash with a single word from her. "What do you want, Beatrice?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "It's very simple," she replied, rising and walking gracefully towards him. "You will end this farce. The annulment will proceed as planned, but ahead of schedule. You will send Miss Langley away immediately, and then you will announce our engagement. You need a duchess, Alistair. I am the duchess you were always meant to have." The ultimatum was absolute: ruin or a life shackled to this venomous woman. But Alistair's first thought was not of his fortune or his title. It was of Genevieve. The scandal would destroy her. Society would label her a fortune hunter, an adventuress. Her reputation, and that of her family, would be in tatters. He had dragged her into this mess to save himself, and now his actions were poised to ruin her completely. He had to protect her, no matter the cost to himself. When Genevieve came looking for him an hour later, her heart full of the memory of their kiss and hope for their future, she found a stranger. Alistair was standing by the window of the library, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "Your Grace," she began softly. "The month is nearly concluded, Duchess," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He turned, and the man from the cottage was gone, replaced by the cold, remote Duke from their first meeting. "Your services will soon no longer be required. I trust you will be ready to depart in 2 days' time. Mr. Davies will finalize the financial arrangements." Genevieve stared at him, her mind reeling. "Alistair, what are you saying? After what happened?" "What happened?" he interrupted, his voice cutting like ice. "Was a mistake. A moment of weakness brought on by proximity and a storm. It meant nothing. Our arrangement was a business transaction. It is now concluded. Do not attempt to make it more than it was." Every word was a physical blow. She saw the contract on the desk behind him, the one Beatrice had left. She didn't know how, but she knew this was somehow connected. Yet, his coldness was so absolute, his dismissal so complete, that doubt began to poison her heart. Had he been using her all along? Was the confession in the cottage just another part of the performance, a way to ensure her compliance until the very end? Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She drew on every ounce of her pride, the quiet dignity that had carried her through so much. "Very well, Your Grace," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "You need not worry. I am well aware of the terms of my employment." She turned and walked away, her back straight, leaving Alistair alone with the ghost of the happiness he had just sacrificed. He watched her go, his heart fracturing with every step she took. He had saved her from public ruin, but in doing so, he had shattered her heart, and his own. The next 2 days were an agony of silent farewells. Genevieve packed her belongings, the beautiful gowns and jewels feeling like mocking reminders of a life that was never truly hers. She took one last walk to the art studio and left the painting of the ruined abbey on the easel, a final, unsigned message. The staff, led by Mrs. Gable, watched her with a mixture of pity and confusion. The Duchess was leaving. The fairy tale was over. Alistair was a wraith, confined to his study. He drank heavily, the chilling words of his solicitor echoing in his mind. "You are making a grave error, Your Grace," Mr. Davies had pleaded. "You are sacrificing your happiness for a title your father already dishonored. Is the name Blackwood worth more than the woman who has brought life back into this house?" The question haunted him. He looked at the portraits of his ancestors, their stern faces judging him. He had sought to save their legacy, but he was repeating their gravest error, placing duty and fortune above the matters of the heart. He finally understood the sadness in his mother's eyes. She had been trapped by the title, and now he was willingly shackling himself to a loveless future, all for the sake of money. He realized with sickening clarity that he didn't just need a bride for a month to get the trust fund. He needed Genevieve for a lifetime to save his soul. On the morning of her departure, as Genevieve's carriage was being brought to the front of the manor, Alistair made his choice. He would not lose her. He would not become his father. He raced from his study, shouting for his horse to be saddled. He knew where Beatrice would be. She was on her way to Lord Harrington's London townhouse to seal her victory. Meanwhile, Genevieve, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, found she could not leave without one last look at the portrait gallery. As she stood there, Mr. Davies approached her, his expression grave. "Your Grace," he said, "the Duke is a fool, but he is a fool who is breaking his own heart to protect you from a scandal. Lady Beatrice has the contract." The truth hit Genevieve like a physical blow. It wasn't cruelty she had seen in Alistair's eyes. It was desperation. He hadn't been pushing her away because he didn't care. He had been pushing her away because he cared too much. Without a second thought, she ran from the gallery and demanded the coachman take her to London at once. The confrontation took place in Lord Harrington's opulent drawing-room. Beatrice, elegant and triumphant, had just presented the contract. "As you can see, my lord," she said sweetly, "the Duke's entire marriage is a fraud." Harrington looked at the document, his face grim. Before he could speak, the doors burst open and Alistair strode in, his clothes dusty from his frantic ride. "She is telling the truth," Alistair announced, his voice ringing with authority. Every head turned towards him. "The marriage began as a contract. I was desperate, and I did what I thought was necessary to save my family's name." Beatrice smiled, victorious. But Alistair wasn't finished. He turned to Lord Harrington, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I came here today fully prepared to lose your partnership and my great-aunt's inheritance, because those things mean nothing to me anymore. What started as a business arrangement has become the most important thing in my life. I have fallen in love with my wife. I love her intelligence, her courage, and her spirit. I will not lose her. You can keep your deal, and the trust can remain locked forever. Genevieve is all the fortune I need." As he spoke, a figure appeared in the doorway behind him, unnoticed. Genevieve stood there, tears streaming down her face, having heard every word. Lord Harrington stared at Alistair, then at the contract in his hand. A slow smile spread across his face. He was, at heart, a romantic. He ripped the contract in two. "A man who is willing to risk ruin for the woman he loves," Harrington declared, "is a man I can trust with my business. The partnership is yours, Duke." Beatrice stared in horror, her victory turned to ash. But Alistair barely heard him. He had turned and seen Genevieve standing in the doorway. He crossed the room to her in 3 long strides, his eyes only for her. He went down on one knee, there in the middle of Lord Harrington's drawing-room. He took her hand, the one still wearing his ring. "Genevieve Langley," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been a fool. I offered you a contract when I should have offered you my heart. I don't want you for a month. I need you for a lifetime. Will you do me the honor of being my wife, my duchess, my everything, for real this time?" Through her tears, Genevieve smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alistair. Always." He rose and kissed her, a kiss that sealed not a contract, but a promise of a lifetime of love, partnership, and art in the house that a temporary bride had finally turned into a home. 5 years had passed since the dramatic confrontation in Lord Harrington's London home. The seasons had turned, and with them, the very soul of Blackwood Manor had been transformed. The once silent, imposing fortress of stone was now a home, filled with the warmth of a constantly burning hearth and the bright, echoing laughter of children. The heavy velvet curtains were often drawn back, letting sunlight stream into the corridors, illuminating the portraits of ancestors who seemed to smile down now, their stern gazes softened by the happiness that bloomed within the walls they guarded. The heart of this new Blackwood was the West Wing studio. It was no longer a forgotten sanctuary of a lonely duchess, but a vibrant, sun-drenched space of creation. The walls were a testament to their journey. Alongside the melancholic, beautiful works of Alistair's mother hung the celebrated landscapes of Genevieve Beaumont, the Duchess of Blackwood. Her work, now exhibited in London's most prestigious galleries under her own name, was renowned for its emotional depth and mastery of light. Critics lauded her as one of the era's most significant artistic voices. Alistair entered the studio, balancing a tea tray with practiced ease. He was a different man from the haunted Duke who had once stalked these halls. The harsh lines of stress on his face had been replaced by the gentle creases of frequent smiles. He found Genevieve not at her easel, but sitting on the floor, her sapphire gown dusted with charcoal, guiding the small hand of their 3-year-old daughter, Ilara, as she enthusiastically scribbled on a piece of parchment. Standing proudly beside them was their 4-year-old son, Arthur, holding up his own drawing of a rather lopsided horse. "A formal review of the artist's latest submissions, I see," Alistair said, his voice full of warm amusement. Genevieve looked up, her face glowing. "Arthur has captured the essence of your stallion, my love, and Ilara shows a remarkable passion for abstract expression." Alistair set the tray down and knelt, ruffling his son's dark hair, a perfect blend of his own and Genevieve's. "It is a masterpiece, son. We shall have it framed." He looked at his wife, at the smudge of blue paint on her cheek and the unrestrained joy in her eyes. "Lord Harrington sends his regards," he said softly, for her ears only. "The final shipment for the American partnership has sailed. He calls our venture the most successful of his career." "He was a good man to bet on love," Genevieve whispered back, her hand finding his. Their life was a tapestry woven from the threads of what they had built together. The Blackwood fortune was secure, more prosperous than ever, but its true value was measured in moments like these. The memory of Lady Beatrice Crawford had faded into social obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in London drawing rooms about a woman whose spite had cost her everything. Later, after the children were sent off with their nanny, Alistair pulled Genevieve to the large window overlooking the gardens. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, as they watched their children chase butterflies across the lawn. "Do you remember the first piece you showed me?" he asked quietly. "The watercolour of the ruined abbey." "I remember the stern Duke who demanded to see it as a condition of my using the studio," she teased gently. "That man was a fool," Alistair murmured into her hair. "He thought he needed land and a title. He had no idea what he truly needed was the artist who could see the beauty in ruins." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his jaw. That artist needed a man who would not ask her to choose between her passion and her heart. Her dream of visiting Italy had been fulfilled not once, but 3 times. Her name was her own, her talent celebrated, and her love for her husband the unwavering foundation of her world. On the main easel in the center of the room sat her current project, her most ambitious work to date. It was not for any gallery or patron. It was a portrait of Alistair, Arthur, and Ilara, captured in a moment of unguarded joy in this very studio. It was a painting infused with love, laughter, and light. It was her masterpiece. Alistair looked from the painting to his wife, his heart overflowing with a love so profound it still humbled him. The desperate Duke who had sought a bride for a month had been saved, not by a contract or an inheritance, but by the unexpected lifetime of love he had found with her. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that this was his legacy. Not the name, not the title, but the beautiful, vibrant family his temporary duchess, had made real. The story of Alistair and Genevieve reminds us that the most binding contracts are not written on paper, but on the heart. It shows us that true wealth isn't found in titles or trust funds, but in the courage to risk everything for love. They began as a duke in need of a bride and a woman in need of a lifeline, but they discovered they were two halves of the same soul who needed each other for a lifetime. Theirs is a testament to the idea that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, rewriting the terms of our lives and giving us a future far grander than we ever could have planned. If their journey from a desperate bargain to an unbreakable bond touched your heart, please show your support by hitting the like button. Share this story with someone who loves a tale of romance and redemption, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that sweep you away. Your support allows us to keep bringing these timeless tales to life. Thank you for listening.